Let's talk about graded assignment number 4, HTML Me Something, in which you will build a simple web page. This one introduces topics such as the terminal, HTML, CSS, Git, and GitHub. But you don't need to actually have any JavaScript for this assignment. It's purely HTML and CSS. Okay, let's look at the instructions. This is another one of these that actually has multiple pages. There's content on this page and then links to part 1 and part 2 that deal specifically with the HTML portion of the assignment and then the CSS portion. And you should do them in order. You should get the HTML set before you start messing with the styling. And then there is a bonus mission down here and some information about submitting. So you are going to go ahead and set up a repo for Git, and you'll actually build this and submit it with a link in GitHub and not with a REPL. So no more Replit for future assignments, including this one. And so I guess I'll go ahead and just jump into the HTML portion to talk about that a little bit. And they talk about this, idea of separating content from the design and layout. That's essentially what's happening here. You're going to spend time just working on the content, and then you're going to switch over and think about the design. And so the idea here is you're going to build some sort of page that tells some sort of story, has some sort of information that is either personal to you or just, maybe on some topic that interests you. Typically want to have like 3 to 10 paragraphs or sections, and they give a few ideas here, but the number 2 here is what's really important because they're telling you the minimum requirements for this. So you need to use each of the following structural HTML tags: P, header, footer, main, and article. You can use more than that, but you definitely have to have at least one of each of these 5. You also need to have an image tag. You need to place your image into your project by having an images subfolder inside the HTML Me Something directory. And then you want to use at least one HTML entity. They link here to the page that tells you about those. One example is, the copyright symbol, but you can get a lot more creative than that. So check out those resources. And then, just be creative, make it really unique and interesting. There are going to be lots of examples that you can look at, the ones provided by Launch Code. I've got some on my website as well that I'll look at in a second. But, don't just use that as a template and just fill in your own details. The idea here is for you to really think through how you want your information to flow from top to bottom, and what kind of story you want to tell, what kind of information you want to do, and put it together. Planning ahead is really smart. Just thinking about all the different things you're going to need. You want to use your browser dev tools and use that as you're developing so that you can, test, what CSS affects something on the page, or what HTML is actually, nested that's forming up, part of the content on the page. And you can use anything. It doesn't even have to be tags that we have taught you. You can find lots of resources online for additional HTML tags and other content that might help you accomplish what it is you're really trying to do. And then they remind you here that you need to be adding and committing your changes. I recommend that you don't just do the entire, HTML portion and then commit it all at once. I recommend you do it in sections, make multiple commits, small commits, so that you have, specific starting and stopping points where you're making different changes, just in case you do want to go back and refer to things you had done previously and maybe you changed it and overwrote it. But having multiple commits will allow you to see those changes across time. And then the second part, which is also linked here, but from the first page, if we go back, you can see it's linked here and also right here, part 2 CSS. We can look at that. This is where you actually start styling all of the content that you've already written. So you can start applying classes and IDs, or even just applying styling to the selectors themselves. Like, maybe you want to change the color and size and font of your H1 heading, or, you want all your paragraphs to follow certain rules. That this is where you're going to do that. These are the minimum requirements. You need to use margin and padding to space things out well. You need to use each of the different types of selectors, whether it's an element selector, a class, or an ID selector. You might go heavy on one of these, but definitely have at least one example of each. And then this one, they want you to have a margin value of 8 pixels for your body, a display type of block. They want the heading on the page to have an ID called main heading, and then use that ID selector in styles.css to give it a color value of red. And you want the paragraph on your page to have the ID of test P and a class name of fun paragraph. These are changes that they must have made more recently, because when I was a student, these requirements were not here. But oh yeah, and this one needs to have a color value of green. So just pay attention to these requirements, because while you can have lots of creative license to do as many other different things as you want, they do have some very specific things they want you to do here. Again, developer tools is where it's at. There are a couple examples they provide for you. In part 1, there's a unstyled example that shows you just the image HTML, and then there's this style example, and I forgot to do that. So let me go back to part 1, and let's push that up here. Yeah, so this is something that Launch Code provides as an example of just the content. If you have just done the HTML, it might look something like this, where you have a header, and we can actually look at the DevTools. You can explore this by coming in and saying, what is this? And if you hover over it, it tells you right there. It's probably a little tiny on your screen, but it's an H2. It has a font size of 24 pixels, et cetera, et cetera. And you can see that right there. And then as it goes down, there's, text, there's pictures, there's links in different places. So this is a good example of just, a way that this is Chris Bay, who has provided a lot of content for Launch Code over time, just, showing off different places he's been, photos from each of those places. So that's kind of just the HTML. And then if you come back over to the CSS portion, there's a second example where he actually put some styling into this. So he made these links, inline links with no bullet points, and instead of the bullet points you saw on the first example here. And then also you can see there's, either margin or padding, depending on how he set it up. I guess we can take a look. Margin 0 auto. Okay, so here's how he managed this. I see now. So you can see that this has a max width of 1024 pixels. And then it says margin auto. So that's why no matter how wide the screen is, those margins just change to keep this part centered in the middle of the page. So that's one way that you can do this. And it's kind of nice because it keeps changing. And then if the page gets, smaller, you don't even see that at all. But it's responsive, but it's still very straightforward. He doesn't have a real fancy layout, and that's on purpose. You're not expected to do anything super fancy. It can be very, very straightforward, just like this, but it has a nice clean look. It's easy to read. And so I'm going to show you, let's see, let me finish with the instructions. Here's another reminder of going through and, making commits as you go. They give you some really good examples here of, very specific messages. As you're going, you might, continue making these small commits with, very specific messages to let you know which changes you made on which commit. And then you can go back to the assignment page, and there's the submission instructions here. The bonus mission actually is about GitHub pages. It's very easy to do this. Okay, so let's say we're in my student resources repository for my website. If I go into, okay, so settings is the tab up here, and GitHub pages is actually right here on the left now. It used to be like part of this long general thing. So now it's here. So you can go into here, and then you can see right here, you know, I'm using it and I'm sourcing it as deploying it from a branch. I've chosen the main branch to be which branch it's deploying from. And for you, that's probably all you'll do. You'll have main or master, and that'll be it. And that's all you really need to do. And it might take a few minutes, but then once it's ready, it'll tell you right up here, your site is live, and it'll give you the link for that. So that is a bonus mission. You aren't required to do this, but it's really nice because it gives you a way to have a link that someone can go and demo and see your page without having to actually like fork it and run the code on their local machine. So I highly recommend you do this. It doesn't take long. And by the way, I use this one. I have my own domain name. So yours will probably say like, you know, your GitHub name.github.io instead of codewithcarrie.com, right? Okay, so let's go back. I wanted to show you a couple more examples. Yeah, and all of these are coming from this website. So if you filter on topic on my website here, if you go to the HTML and CSS portion, you can see some of my just basic exercises. And this one right here would be a good one to look at as far as like really simple HTML and CSS that would be along the, you know, on par with what you're expected to do, and maybe a little bit extra. Sometimes I do a little bit of extra CSS, but I tried to keep this one pretty simple. And then I also have, if we switch here and go back to all the topics, I have for GA number 4, the HTML me something. I've got 2 prep exercises here that actually have, you know, tutorials where I walk you through how I did it. Let's look at these one at a time. So my favorite hobby, you know, you can see this is in Replit, but if we actually, and all I did was just, you know, use some pictures and, you know, some bullet points here and some different sections. If we go over and look at the code, you can see what I'm talking about. I've got some instructions here that really just, you know, kind of walk you through thinking through how you're going to do this. And this is an exercise that you can actually follow to practice if you want to. So there's instructions for you doing this with starter code, but what I'm showing you here is the solution. The final outcome was the solution when we run it. This one here, I've just floated a couple pictures to the right, but I have, you know, I have some links in here. I've used those HTML entities for those little arrows, and then also, you know, the copyright symbol down here. But I kept it pretty straightforward. This one actually has a lot more to it. I've used Flexbox classes with CSS to make a more interesting layout. And if you're, you know, for me, I already knew HTML and CSS when I was doing LC 101. So I actually decided to learn Flexbox just to challenge myself a little more. So if you're in that position where you already are pretty handy with the basics, you know, maybe this is a good assignment to actually learn something new for it. But this one definitely has way more to it than you're required to do. But if you want more of a challenge, this would be a good exercise for you to look at. And this is a fake page. My grandmother was a wonderful knitter and crocheter, but she never owned a yarn shop. And I certainly do not run one. But yeah, so I've got some links in here, and you know, my little footer down here. I used, you know, the bullet point HTML entities in between each of these, the address and the email address and everything. And, you know, laid things out with some columns here and with Flexbox, that sort of thing. But, you know, just have fun with it. Make it unique to you. It can be as simple as you want it to be, or you can challenge yourself and take it further. It's totally up to you. Just make sure you have the basic requirements as they, you know, outline in all of these instructions on these other 2 pages. And then once you're done, you know, paste a link to your GitHub repo. Make sure all your code from your local machine has been pushed to your GitHub, and then share that link to submit it, and then let your TAs know that it's ready, and schedule that demo. Let's see, I feel like there was something else I was going to tell you. Oh, I was going to show you the other instructions here. So let me do that real fast. Yeah, so this one, I definitely have a lot more files. And I've got this one called content planning, where I really just wanted to point out how useful it can be to think through all the different aspects of your content, like the title. Do you want a little tagline with your title? Do you want some sort of blurb at the top? You know, if you're going to have lists, you know, what are those going to be? If you have like an about or history section, what would that be? Contact info. And this was particular to this assignment. It doesn't necessarily mean that each of these things apply to what you're going to do. But, you know, for my images, I had quite a few images I wanted to possibly include for this. So I made a list of all of the links that I needed. And in this case, I'm using ID numbers from my Google Drive and forming up these links to be able to use that from my Google Drive. And then down here, you know, I had some external links for linking things on the page. And I took the time to kind of arrange that all here for reference before I dug in and actually started doing the HTML. And I found that a useful process. And then, you know, there's the actual HTML itself. The instructions here for this as a practice exercise. So if you want to actually do this from scratch, these are the instructions. And then I have some additional resources here in README that just talk about, you know, formatting your code, CSS properties, color codes, you know, managing your height and width, and, you know, embedding images from Google Drive. And there's a YouTube video you can follow if you want. And then, you know, just how to find examples using developer tools, that sort of thing. And this is the one where, you know, I definitely used some Flexbox. And so you use things like flex direction, you know, so you'll see those kind of thrown in here. But in any case, this is a more challenging one, but definitely you could go through this exercise or at least use it for reference if you would like. Just to help you gain a better understanding of how all this works before you decide to do yours. But of course, again, do not use any of these examples anywhere as templates and then just change out the information. Think through the process, build it from scratch, make it yours, and, you know, have a lot of fun with it. One of my favorite things when I was a TA was this assignment, like getting to see things that were, you know, fun and unique and interesting about each of the students that I was working with. And yeah, this is where you get to really, you know, show your personality, and it's fun. So have some fun with it. All right. I hope this has been helpful, and I will see you next time.